And as promised, today our guest is Cheryl Ann Snyder, recently named to be Brookline's Emergency Management Coordinator, whatever the heck that is. We're going to find out here on Brookline Interactive Group. Cheryl, welcome, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Tommy. It's nice to be here.
First, let's get started with what is an emergency management coordinator? Are you coordinating all of the emergencies so we only have one at a time, or how does this work?
Don't I wish? I know a lot of people around the country who would very much like to have emergencies one at a time. Many of them down on the coast getting attacked by hurricanes, and many more on the West Coast by the fires in Western America, over by California, etc. So yeah, no, emergencies don't wait until one is over for another emergency to start, unfortunately. They are, by definition, something that is unplanned, unexpected, and you want to do everything you can to be ready for them, but you also don't know when they're going to happen or what they're going to be. So that makes preparedness a little bit difficult, but actually it's not that bad.
And so when we think about emergencies, we often think about the police department or the fire department as sort of the agencies that handle emergencies. But a coordinator certainly is coordinating more than two agencies, right, that operate out of the same building. So tell us about the other agencies.
Well, for the pandemic, obviously, we've been in an emergency since March, and because of the health issue involved in the pandemic, the public health department has been a very, very big part of this response. I happen to have been working as the emergency preparedness coordinator in the health department when all this started in March, and one of my jobs in that role was pandemic preparation. So I've been actually working on this for a number of years, and as health departments across the country have been doing in conjunction with the CDC. But many departments are involved in an emergency. The DPW, for example, is very involved in many emergencies. If there is flooding, if there are trees down, if there is damage to our infrastructure, if there's a snowstorm, we're still dependent on the Department of Public Works to, move the debris and make travel possible again. Many departments play a role in this, and since the pandemic started in March, I would say almost every department has been involved in one way or another in the town's response to the pandemic.
Which is why it makes sense perhaps to have a coordinator, right? After all, we've got these different agencies, each with department heads, whether it's a commissioner or a chief or something else, trying to manage their silo of folks. And so we've hired Cheryl Ann Snyder to just be the boss of all of them and just make sure they're all doing exactly what they should be doing, right? So the chief just takes your call and does what you ask, and it's easy.
Not in the least. I report to Fire Chief John Sullivan because he is also the emergency management director for the town. But my role is more coordination between departments. And as a matter of fact, the emergency management coordinator is not as involved in the response as you think. Police know what to do in an emergency. The fire knows what to do in an emergency. Even DPW knows what to do, whether there's a storm or a flood or a snow removal task. They all know how to respond to the emergency. What my role is trying to do is facilitate the all of the agencies coming together, bringing their own roles and response to the situation, trying to organize that response in a cohesive manner, but also work on things that are not response oriented. Emergency management is preparedness, mitigation, planning, response, and recovery. And so when everybody's ready to respond, that's great. But we've got a lot of preparation to do before the emergency, and then we have a lot of recovery work to do after the emergency. And that's pretty much where emergency management coordination comes in.
Now, you mentioned fire and public health and police and DPW, but I know there's also a volunteer corps in town. Residents, citizens, maybe folks who live out of town but really care about Brookline, who pitch in as directed when helpful. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your background there?
Sure, we actually have two volunteer organizations in town. We have one volunteer organization called the Medical Reserve Corps. It is hosted out of the Public Health Department. And in my previous job, I was also the coordinator of that group, the Medical Reserve Corps. And it is focused on health issues primarily. So a mass casualty issue or something like this, a pandemic. The other volunteer organization is CERT, or Community Emergency Response Team. That is coordinated through the police department and has been for over a decade. And that is also volunteers. We actually share a lot of volunteers. I'd say about a third to a half of the volunteers are actually in both programs. And there's different training that goes along in the CERT program. It's more focused on assisting police, for example, urban search and rescue, traffic control, things like that. But we work together and we train together, and it's really a fulfilling thing. I love our volunteers. They're great. Since this pandemic began, they have been working in many, many different ways in this community to help our community continue and to thrive as much as possible in this changed world situation. We were able to immediately get volunteers over to the food pantry, for example, which needed volunteers desperately as the need for food increased, and the volunteers who often went to the pantry and were either older or immune compromised couldn't go anymore. So it was great to have that group of volunteers that had already been vetted, had already been trained, knew the town, knew the community, and were ready to jump in with very little notice.
And so long as folks are thinking about those two volunteer groups, CERT and the Medical Corps, how would somebody who is interested in learning more about that or participate in that learn more or sign up? How would they get involved?
Well, for the Medical Reserve Corps, it's very easy. We've got an email address, mrc@brooklinema.gov. That goes to the MRC coordinator, a position that is open at the moment, but hopefully won't be for very long. And for the CERT program, there's not a rolling admission on the CERT program. It's a very specific 10-week course that people can sign up for. There is information on the police website and also on the emergency management website about CERT programs. We don't have a class scheduled at the moment, but if you are interested in CERT, you can email Officer Nick Goon, NGOON @brooklinema.gov, and he will get back to you with information when the next training gets scheduled.
Thank you. I mean, as you know, and as I know, Brookline has a tremendous amount of talent and interest in volunteering, and that manifests itself in so many different ways. And so if this sounds like something that's interesting to you, I encourage you to find out more. And if it still sounds like a good fit, go for it. There's so many different ways to serve our community, and this is such a big one. Cheryl, what are you working on now?
Well, we're working on a lot of things right now, Tommy. First of all, I'm working with the health department to help plan our annual flu clinics. as you know, it's very important to get the flu vaccine this year. We want to make sure that the hospitals aren't overwhelmed with flu patients right in the middle of a COVID pandemic. So people can go to their primary care doctor, people can go to their pharmacy. There are many, many ways to get the flu shot. The health department gets a limited amount of vaccine every year, primarily for children under the age of 18 and for adults who don't have insurance. Luckily, there aren't very many adults without insurance in the Commonwealth or in Brookline, but there are some, particularly people who have come from abroad and therefore have traveler's insurance rather than being part of the American insurance plan. And so those are some of the people that we've focused our vaccination programs on in the past. This year, because of COVID, the flu clinics will be a little bit more complicated than normal. We will be doing them outside. They will be a drive up at Lars Anderson at the end of October, and then a drive up with Walkup at Pierce campus, Pierce School campus in the village in November. Actually, there are 2 dates in November. And more information about the flu clinics will be sent out hopefully the very beginning of next week. All of the flu clinics this year will require appointments. And so information will be shared on how to contact the health department to schedule an appointment for one of those clinics.
I'm glad to hear that we have some available walk-up clinics. Of course, there are plenty of folks in Brookline for whom driving is not an option, and it's really important to me and to so many others that everyone have these opportunities. I know many months ago we had an opportunity for a sort of last-minute COVID antibody test that was at Lars Anderson, and when things are happening quickly, you do the best you can, and it's never going to be perfect for everyone, despite Cheryl and Snyder's best efforts to be prepared. But I'm glad to hear that with more preparation time, we are considering that. And I want to remind folks that if your child is enrolled in Brookline Public Schools, that's BEEP and K through 12, or if your child is attending a private school, your child must have a flu vaccine by January 1, 2021. It is not optional. It is not ambiguous. You have to do it. Of course, there are exceptions for medical need, but those are actually not so easy to get. If you think that applies to you, please feel free to talk to the child's pediatrician. But more likely, please feel free to go ahead and make sure you've got that flu vaccine. And I would encourage you, Cheryl, tell me if you think differently. Go ahead and take care of it sooner rather than later. There's going to be a December rush, and you don't want to find yourself not being able to get that vaccine or having to cancel some other appointment because the only slot you can get is at some really inconvenient time. So those flu vaccines, really critical. I've heard a rumor about Preparedness Month. I hope it's October and not September. Tell us about Preparedness Month.
Well, Preparedness Month is actually September. However, the pandemic has affected our ability to do that, just like it's affected our ability to do so many things this year. We do have a lot of things that we try to do in the month of September to bring people's awareness about preparedness into focus. It's right before hurricane season for us anyhow. We usually get our hurricanes in late September or October up here. And it's just before we start thinking about snowstorms and our usual emergencies here. Emergency preparedness is very much focused on where you are and who you are. So in the Northeast, we don't have to prepare excessively for major forest fires the way they do out in California and Oregon and Washington states. We have to prepare for big snowstorms. I'm sure most of us remember the nightmare of the winter of 2015. I live on White Place, which is a very tiny street, and there was nowhere to go for a very long time. But everybody has to prepare specifically for both where they live and what they'll need in an emergency. So if you have kids, you need to think about their needs. If you have pets, you should think about their needs. If you have older parents or you are older yourself, there are certain things that you might want to make sure you're doing in advance for those specific needs. One thing that I like to encourage everyone to do is to get what's called a file of life. We have them at the health department. And basically, this is a little packet that can go on your refrigerator. It's got a little magnet there. And this card you can fill out with all of your information about your medical history, your medications, your doctor's information. Emergency response people, EMTs and police and fire, they know to look for this on a refrigerator. And they will take it with them to the hospital, particularly if you are unable to speak for yourself. This can be life-saving. So this is a really great thing to have. Particularly if you live alone. That's a really important thing to have, is the file of life. Other than that, we really encourage everybody to have a communication plan. The first thing you want to do in any emergency is let the people that you care about and that care about you know if you're okay or not, or if you need help. So to have those numbers written down, we all have our phones now. I don't remember anybody's phone number. If my phone fell in a puddle or in a flood, how would I get in touch with anybody? Well, I happen to have inside my phone case, we're going to see if I can get this phone case off right now, but I have a small piece of paper in here, which I can't, unfortunately, get out of here at the moment, with my daughter's number written down, my parents' number written down, my brother's number written down, so that in an emergency, I can get in touch with people, even if my phone battery dies, for example. Another really great thing that we are doing is we've got a new emergency response notification system. We call it Alert Brookline here, and you can access it. We have the 911 data, what's called reverse 911 data. So your landline, Tommy, assuming you have one at your house, is already in our database. But most people don't have a landline. I don't have a landline. I just have my cell phone. And so if you go onto the Brookline website and sign up for Alert Brookline, you can put in all of your cell phone numbers, your kids' cell phone numbers, your email address. You can get these notifications in email, in text, by phone, and you can also get them translated into one of 5 languages if English is not your primary language.
So now, passe is to get that magnet and stick it on your refrigerator, but flambe is to go ahead and fill the information out and put it on your refrigerator. And don't just you pick it up at Brookline Day and you go home and you slap it on the fridge and it's blank. That's not really helping anybody out. So nope. if you like perhaps someone on this interview has one that's not filled out on his refrigerator, as soon as the show is over, go ahead and take a few minutes and fill that out, because really, that's what you need to do to make use of it. Cheryl, can you tell us about things that folks who live in apartments, folks who live in houses, folks who live by themselves, folks with pets or kids, what should we be doing? What are some easy things we can do now when there's not an emergency to be a little bit more prepared for what may be an inevitable outcome, hopefully later rather than sooner? What should we be doing in our homes to be ready?
Well, I like to think of it, Tommy, as putting on your seatbelt. All right. I don't expect today when I get into my car that I will be in an automobile accident. However, I know that if I have my seatbelt on and today happens to be the day, then my seatbelt will help me be more resilient. And that's really what we're talking about. How am I going to get through this emergency? What is going to make me more comfortable? What is going to make me healthier? What is going to make me safer? And so there's any number of things. The communication plan is really important. Anything about, where you're going to meet your family. And don't just think, okay, there's a fire in the middle of the night and we'll show up on our neighbor down the street's doorstep. Great, but where would you meet if something happened right now in the middle of the day? It's a little bit different now because so many of us are home with our families more, but that won't always be the case. You want to make sure you have the medicine you need, even if you can't get to your house for a few days. Make sure that you have the special things that will make your life easier if you are unable to go home for a while. Things for the kids, snacks, special foods if you can't eat, if you have allergies. I learned a few years ago that I have celiac disease, which means I can't eat gluten. The number one thing that people give you when you go to a shelter, you got to leave your home because something's happened, is pizza. I need to have something that I can eat in my bag so that I'm not hangry in the middle of an emergency. Nobody wants to be cold in the middle of an emergency. If you're somebody, I have a great friend, she's constantly cold. She has a sweater in her bag all the time so that when she gets cold, she can put it on. Have your sweater, have a warm pair of socks, have a little snack, have your medicines, have your phone numbers. Think of things that you would want if you had to either leave your house quickly or couldn't go back to your house for a period of time, for whatever reason. We can think about a lot of things that have happened here in Massachusetts recently. Look at Andover, North Andover and Lawrence a few years ago with the gas explosions. Some people were out of their homes for a very long time. And others didn't have power or gas for a very long time. Knowing where you can go with your pet, if you have a pet, is really important. Or where could you drop that pet so that you don't have to take it with you? Or even if you just end up in the hospital. I mean, an emergency can be personal as well. I live alone. I have 2 cats. I have to make sure that somebody will be able to get into my house and take care of my cats if I suddenly end up in the hospital for any point of time. We're in Corona times now, Tommy. We all have to be ready just in case we suddenly have to go to the hospital and make sure that our families and the people and the pets that we are responsible for are okay, even if that happens.
Cheryl, thank you for that. I'm going to take a minute at the end to remind folks of 2 things. Number 1, if there's an emergency, if you think it's an emergency and you're not sure, dial 911. That's what it's for. Don't hesitate to dial 911. If you're afraid and it's because of something that the authorities can help with, you call 911 and the dispatch will help work you through it, whatever it is. The second thing I'm going to remind you about is we have a national emergency and the cure is November 3rd. Whatever your politics are, you go out and you make sure you get your vote in on Tuesday, November 3rd. There's a lot of different ways to do it. You can request a ballot by mail and mail it back. You can request a ballot by mail and physically bring it back to town hall. You can go to town hall and vote early. You can go to your polling place on election day and vote. If you are a U.S. citizen, however it is that works best for you, make a plan and make sure that you get your vote counted. It's critical. You've been watching Brookline Interactive Group. We've been hanging out with Cheryl and Snyder. Brookline's new emergency management coordinator. Cheryl, we're delighted for you and know you're going to have tremendous success in this role. And every day we don't have an emergency, we will thank you for it. I'm Tommy Vitolo. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Tommy.